Movie is a 2024 horror novel by Paul Tremblay. Now, I have to confess that I am not a huge fan of Paul Tremblay. I think the first thing of his that I read was Growing Things and Other Stories. And I was vaguely aware that one or two of the short stories in that collection was connected to another of his novels called A Head Full of Ghosts. So about a year or two back, I decided to pick up that particular novel and read it. And I hated it with a burning passion. A Head Full of Ghosts read, to me, in my entirely subjective opinion, like the author was trying to deconstruct The Exorcist, doing the whole, "Oh, it was mental illness all along, you silly, stupid bumpkins. Oh, you didn't believe a teenage girl could be smart enough to trick you?" I cannot stress this enough, but you can only appreciate how bad of a take that is once you've read William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist and understand exactly how thorough this book was in investigating Reagan's symptoms through a logical psychiatric lens before an exorcism was ever even brought up. This book went through great pains to question whether or not Reagan was playing a trick on everyone, or if she might be severely mentally ill. Demonic possession was not the first conclusion. I don't even think it was the second, third, or fourth, and they absolutely believed that she might be smart enough to trick them. Anyway, my ranting about A Head Full of Ghosts only serves to explain why I've more or less refused to read any of Paul Tremblay's books in recent years. There have been a few of his books that I was kind of vaguely interested in reading based on the premise, but I had no particular urge to seek them out based off of the intensity of my dislike for A Head Full of Ghosts. It simply happened one night at work that I was exceptionally bored, couldn't decide on what to listen to for an audiobook, and his book Horror Movie was available on Libby, so I went with it. So to get on to the recap, we never actually learn our protagonist's name, but over the course of the novel, we jump back and forth between the past and present as he explains his connection to a horror movie called Horror Movie. I'm going to explain the events in chronological order for the sake of clarity, but know that the plot basically jumps back and forth between all of these events constantly. So back in 1993, the protagonist was pulled by an old friend/acquaintance named Valentina to play the role of the thin kid in the movie that she was directing, written by her friend Cleo. The protagonist agrees. The basic premise of the film is this. The thin kid is brought to an abandoned elementary school by his three, friends, classmates. I don't know if that's ever made clear, but his three friends, Valentina, Cleo, and Carson, the actors are all using their real names, bring him to the abandoned school, put a weird monster mask on his head, and then tell him to stay in the dark supply closet. Over the next several days, they come back and proceed to torture the thin kid. They stone him, they pelt him with a variety of small objects, not just stones. They burn him with cigarettes, and then they cut off his pinky finger after he does something to anger them. The thin kid, by the way, does not make any attempt to escape. He stays right where he is, and progressively he begins to change. The mask that he's wearing starts to merge with his body. The movie culminates in the thin kid being pulled from the school and brought to a house party where he is effectively sicked on the students present there in revenge, because the four kids at the center of the story are outcasts. I don't know. I'm gonna get into it more, but there's some unexplained stuff in this book. Anyway, after attacking the party, the thin kid's blood is up. He starts chasing down Carson, briefly injuring Valentina, pursuing him home and then killing him. Cleo shows up and proceeds to lure the thin kid away from attacking anyone else, bringing him back to the abandoned elementary school. The two fight, a chainsaw is involved, and Cleo is killed. Valentina then brings the thin kid back to her house and has him sleep beneath her bed. So that's Horror Movie, the movie. In between the explanation of the movie, we bounce between the filming of the movie and the protagonist's experience filming it, and the current day as Horror Movie is being rebooted. We also hop back and forth between other time periods as needed. The filming of Horror Movie, the original, goes from normal to getting progressively darker. The protagonist progressively becomes more obsessed with being in role on the film, immersing himself in the thin kid's character. There's an implication that the mask he wears for most of the film is cursed, but this isn't really delved into that deeply. During the scene in which the thin kid's finger is amputated, the protagonist deliberately keeps his real finger in the prosthetic, so he gets his actual finger cut off. Allegedly. This is where I actually get a little confused. This may be 100% on me. I may have missed something, and this is, my own fault. But he recounts his finger being at least partially amputated on set. Then in 2008, when visiting Valentina, she amputates The same finger? I'm kind of confused as to whether or not they reattached his finger the first time, or if he only lost a little bit of it, or if this is the author trying to create doubt as to the protagonist's reliability. But again, it could be 100% on me. I may have just gotten distracted in that particular moment when they explained it. In any case, over the course of the filming, the protagonist gets progressively more into his role until one of the final scenes. The thin kid, wielding a chainsaw, kills Cleo, the character. The filming of the scene goes on for a while. Everyone's tired. They have avoided certain safety protocols for the sake of how everything is going to look on the film. And finally, when they get to the part where the thin kid kills Cleo, our protagonist finds himself getting way too deep into the character's head again. He leans in close with the chainsaw, and Cleo, the actual person Cleo, who's been shown to have some suicidal tendencies throughout the story, she basically leans back and lets him kill her for real. It's not covered in depth, but afterwards there's naturally a trial. I forget exactly how it goes, but I don't think any of the characters ended up in jail over it. The protagonist's life goes on. We don't get much explanation for what he did in the years between 1993 and 2008, but we do know that he keeps the thin kid's mask, and we learn he's still got a bit of an odd attachment to it. We also learn that he has some very interesting tattoos on his chest and body that kind of look a little bit like scales. And for what it's worth, the mask that he keeps wearing is kind of, if I recall correctly, it's almost like a Creature from the Black Lagoon type mask, so the fact that he chose fact that he has scales on his chest kind of matters. But in any case, in 2008, he goes to visit Valentina, who is dying of cancer. She expresses a desire for the movie to get a new life and has decided to post clips of it on YouTube. After her death, horror movie becomes something of a cult success despite never having been released in full. The protagonist becomes something of a fringe horror icon, showing up at conventions and such. Eventually, he is approached by some people looking to remake the film. They want him to participate. The protagonist agrees, but then proceeds to get a little frosty when he finds out that he won't have much screen time. He'll be playing the thin kid towards the end of the movie, but a younger actor will be playing the role for most of it. The story ends with the protagonist sneaking into the younger actor's trailer, fully costumed in his mask, and killing him, having transformed into whatever creature the thin kid became in the movie. So, first impressions, the casting of Frank Stone did it better. With that being said, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. I think one of the things that this book had going for it is that I listened to it as an audiobook, and the performance was really good. There are parts of the book where the characters are reading through the script, and having different actors read the different characters' parts did add to the experience. The audio during the script reads actually comes across like everyone is sitting together in a room as they do a read-through. Sometimes someone will stutter or repeat themselves as they're reading, and you can hear them flipping the pages of the script. So for what it's worth, if you're thinking of reading this book, it might be worth it to hit up the audiobook version. That might have been like that one thing that tipped the balance for me and made this a good book as opposed to an okay or meh one. The story itself was pretty interesting. It was definitely vague, like not everything is explained, but I think that was 100% intentional. Your mileage may vary on whether or not that's really annoying or only mildly annoying, or if you get something out of it, whatever. The time hopping was a little confusing at times, but I think that's just kind of a thing that's a natural side effect of this type of storytelling. When you cut back and forth between the past and the present, especially as often as this book does, it can be a little tricky to keep the plot. As I mentioned in the recap, I got a little lost as to whether or not the protagonist actually had his finger amputated in 1993, or if maybe he only lost a little of it, or if it was a matter of the author trying to cast doubts on the protagonist's versions of events, but that could be entirely on me getting briefly distracted by something and missing that one line of dialogue. The characters were not super well developed. There's part of me that thinks that this might have been deliberate, like Tremblay was trying to blur the lines between the characters in the movie and their actors. The fact that they shared their actual names with the characters kind of pushes me in that direction, but still, I don't know, the characterization felt a bit hollow. They didn't feel like real people to me, and I don't know that that was entirely intentional on his part. The horror was definitely there in some parts. I felt like the horror aspects of the book were at their strongest during the script narration for the film. Horror movie, the book, had about 80% of its eerie tension packed into the fictional movie that shares its name. The bits with the protagonist in 1993 doing the filming came in second, and the modern-day parts came in third. The modern-day scenes were really not that scary or eerie, except for the final one where the protagonist attacks his replacement. And I guess the one where he visits Valentina. It's not technically modern day, but I mean 2008, close enough, or at least it is to a boomer like me. This book did a bit of what A Head Full of Ghosts did. It created some mystery around whether or not there was going to be a solution grounded in reality — there is no haunting, the protagonist is mentally unstable — or one rooted in the supernatural — the mask and or movie is haunted and the protagonist is possessed. The ending seems to take the supernatural route, but it is also possible that this is an unreliable narrator thing where he might be perceiving himself as being a supernatural creature when he's actually just losing it. Something else this book does that A Head Full of Ghosts did was — I'm trying to word this diplomatically — but it makes commentary on the horror genre and the psychology of those who seek it out. In A Head Full of Ghosts, I found this commentary to be both insufferable and about as subtle as being bashed over the head with a cartoon mallet. Horror Movie is somewhat subtler about this exploration. Or maybe the word I'm looking for is natural. For the most part, this commentary is worked into the plot in a way that works and flows with the story. But one particular bit of this commentary that came across as extremely head-wacky was, I believe it's one of the table reads, when they're reading the script for the movie, I mean. And they describe the scene where the thin kid emerges from the darkness of a room in Carson's house, except that there's a huge delay in him doing so, and this becomes a whole thing. God, how do I explain this? Okay, so if you watch a horror movie, sometimes when a monster is hiding or waiting in the shadows, the director might do a very slow, gradual reveal of them creeping through the dark and into the view of the camera. It's very creepy, builds tension nicely, etc. Horror Movie, the movie, does this too, except that as the script is written, this delay lasts about 5 minutes or so. The movie fixes on the dark doorway for 5 minutes straight, no movement, no noise. The author invites us to imagine a theater full of moviegoers, or people watching the movie at home, getting irate, bored, impatient, rowdy, because the scene has been paused on this one frame for so long that they're starting to wonder if something's broken. The narration proceeds to say that this movie is not for everyone. This movie is for some of us. Then we proceed to get commentary on why lingering on this one shot for 5 minutes is deeply philosophical and horrifying because it allows the viewer to contemplate life, the meaning of art, the meaning of the movie, and the inevitability of our own deaths. He explores every possible perspective of a person watching this movie could have, and is, I'm not joking, over 2,500 words of yapping. I debated whether or not I wanted to read this passage out in full. I feel like I'm not selling my issue with it clearly enough, but I also need to stress that copy-pasting the text from an ebook version of this book results in a document that is 5 pages long. And that's without spaces between the paragraphs. I struggle as a semi-booktuber, I guess we can say, to find where the line is regarding copyright infringement with my reviews. I try to make my recaps of book plots only as detailed as I need them to be to make my point, and reading large chunks of a book in your review is where we start getting into more dangerous territory. So as much as I would like to, I don't feel comfortable reading the whole section in full. The problem is that I also can't really pluck quotes from it because any quote I would use would need the context of the full scene to understand it. My overall point in bringing this particular scene up is that while I can appreciate finding horror in the subtle and mundane, and while I can understand to an extent wanting to show the film's effect on its audience, this particular passage comes across as a bit of a meandering, overdramatic, pretentious meditation on meaningful art and how some people just don't get it. Again, bringing it back to that quote I mentioned earlier, this movie is not for everyone, this movie is for some of us. Now, in fairness, it could just be that the author is trying to characterize the people who wrote the script and the story, but having read A Head Full of Ghosts, I suspect I meant to take this all rather seriously. And I don't. A little too exaggerated for my taste, and as I implied before, I caught a whiff of judgment for those who just don't get or react poorly to this type of art. This is an opinion that I have encountered many, many, many times in various media spaces online and in real life, and one that I am extremely not fond of. So yeah, that was the book. That one scene bugged me. The rest of it was pretty decent as far as eerie, tense horror with a mystery at the center goes. Again, the performances of the actors reading the audiobook may have played a big part in my feeling that way, so I definitely recommend it over the written book.